2 years ago, I opened a brokerage app, picked a few stocks I'd read good things about, and started investing every spare dollar I had. I felt proud of myself. I checked that account more than I'd like to admit, watching the numbers move, feeling like I'd finally figured something out. I was doing the responsible adult thing. What I didn't realize, for almost 2 full years, was that I was doing it in exactly the wrong order. And that mistake quietly cost me a few $1,000s I never got back. Here's what I mean. My employer offered to match part of my retirement contributions. Free money, deposited the moment I contributed enough to claim it. I wasn't contributing enough. I was so focused on picking the right investments that I skipped the one step that didn't require picking anything at all. This isn't a video about which stocks to buy. It's about something almost nobody explains clearly. The order that money should move in before any of that even matters. Get the order wrong, like I did, and it doesn't matter how good your picks are. You're leaving money on the table before you've even started. Picture 2 people, same salary, same amount to invest each month. Person 1 puts every dollar straight into a brokerage account, buying stocks right away. Person 2 puts the same dollar into their workplace retirement plan first, just enough to get their employer's full match, then moves to everything else. Same money in. After year 1, person 2 is already ahead, not because they picked better investments, but because a chunk of their money was never their money to begin with. It came from their employer, deposited automatically, the moment they contributed enough to claim it. That's the first myth worth killing. People assume investing is mostly about picking well. It's mostly about sequencing well. The order money moves through matters more than almost any individual choice you'll make about where it goes. Think of your paycheck as a line of people waiting at 6 different doors before it ever reaches the brokerage account. Skip a door near the front of the line, and you don't just lose your place, you lose something the doors further back can never give you back. So here's who stands behind the first door and why they go first. Door 1 is the employer match, if you have one. Right now, the average employer match sits somewhere between 4 and 6% of salary, and nearly half of employers don't offer one at all, which makes it worth checking rather than assuming. If yours does, that match is usually structured as free money added the moment you contribute your own share. Say your plan matches half of what you put in, up to 6% of your pay. On a $50,000 salary, that's an extra $1,500 a year, handed to you for doing nothing but contributing enough to ask for it. There's no investment on earth that reliably hands you an instant, guaranteed return like that. Not the stock market, not real estate, nothing. Skipping it to invest somewhere else first is a bit like turning down a raise because you'd rather earn the money yourself. I have a coworker who did exactly this for almost 3 years. Smart with money in every other way, no credit card debt, a decent emergency fund, genuinely trying. He just never got around to bumping his contribution up to the match threshold because it felt like a small, boring administrative task compared to picking his own investments. When he finally did the math on what those 3 years of missed match had actually added up to, he described it as, finding out I've been quietly leaving 20s on the sidewalk for 3 years and just never looked down. One caveat worth knowing about that match, not all of it may belong to you the moment it lands. Some employers use a vesting schedule, meaning you only fully own the match after staying a certain number of years, sometimes gradually, sometimes all at once at a set date. That doesn't change the priority. The match should still come first. But it's worth knowing your plan's vesting schedule rather than assuming every dollar is guaranteed to follow you out the door the day you decide to leave. Watch what happens when that gets skipped for even longer than 3 years. Missing a match doesn't just cost you the match itself, it costs you every year that money would have spent quietly compounding alongside everything else. A gap that starts small in year 1 tends to look a lot larger by year 20, simply because it had that much longer to grow. Here's a number worth sitting with. Say someone misses a 5% match on a $50,000 salary, $2,500 a year, left unclaimed. Invested and left alone for 30 years, growing the way stock market investments historically have over long stretches of time, that yearly gap could compound into well over $100,000 by retirement. Not from one bad decision, from one small, boring administrative task nobody got around to. I think about my own 2 years a lot, and it's not the stocks I picked that bother me. It's how many hours I spent researching them, reading, comparing, feeling genuinely proud the day I picked one that did well, while walking right past the door that didn't require any research at all. I genuinely thought I was ahead of most people my age. I had no idea I was quietly behind, for a reason that had nothing to do with which stocks I owned. It's worth knowing where this account even came from, because it's newer than people assume. The 401k itself is named after a small provision buried in a 1978 tax law, almost by accident. A clause originally meant to clarify how certain deferred compensation plans were taxed. A benefits consultant a few years later realized that provision could be used to let employees set aside part of their own salary, tax-deferred, and employers quickly saw an opportunity to attract talent by matching part of it. What started as a footnote in tax code became, within a couple of decades, the primary way most working Americans save for retirement at all. The match specifically exists because it was, and still is, a cheap way for a company to make its compensation package more attractive, which is exactly why it's worth treating as part of your actual paycheck rather than an optional extra. Now, I know this order sounds tidy laid out like this, and real life rarely hands you a clean paycheck with 5 obvious buckets already labeled. If you can't fully fund every step at once, and most people can't, especially early on, the order still tells you what to prioritize with whatever you do have. Even $5 extra a paycheck matters more toward the match than toward the brokerage account, because that $5 is doing something a brokerage account can't. Getting the sequence right with a small amount of money beats getting it backwards with a large one. Door 2, and this one surprises people, is high-interest debt. Not all debt, a mortgage or a reasonable student loan, sits in a very different category, and we'll get to why. This is specifically about the kind of debt sitting on credit cards, the kind carrying interest rates that, right now, average somewhere north of 20% a year. Let's run a quick experiment. Imagine 2 accounts. One is a credit card charging 22% interest. The other is a diversified stock portfolio, which has historically returned somewhere around 7 to 10% a year over long stretches of time, with plenty of down years mixed in along the way. Which one deserves your next dollar? Paying down that 22% card is a guaranteed return of 22%. Not historically, not on average. Guaranteed the moment the balance shrinks. Nothing in the investing world offers that kind of certainty. So investing your extra dollars while a balance like that sits untouched isn't really investing. It's paying to invest, and the fee is the interest you're still accumulating on the side. Picture someone putting $200 into a brokerage account every month while carrying a $5,000 credit card balance at that same 22% rate. On paper, they're investing. In practice, the card is quietly charging them roughly $90 a month in interest, almost half of what they just invested, just for the privilege of carrying that balance one more month. They're not really moving forward. They're mostly refilling a hole they dug on the other side. There's an old debate in personal finance about how to attack debt in general. Pay off the smallest balance first for the psychological win, an approach popularized as the debt snowball, or the highest interest rate first for the math, usually called the debt avalanche. Both have their place once you're dealing with several debts of similar cost. But that debate is a distraction from the bigger point here. This step isn't about which debt to pay off first. It's about recognizing that expensive debt should usually be paid off before aggressive investing starts at all, because the guaranteed math beats the probable math almost every time. Here's the distinction that trips people up, though. A mortgage at a reasonable rate or federal student loans with modest interest don't automatically belong in this step. The math is completely different when the rate is 4 or 5% instead of 20 plus. My aunt spent years throwing every spare dollar at her mortgage, extra payment after extra payment, proud of shaving years off the loan, while her employer's match sat there, unclaimed, the entire time. She wasn't wrong to want the house paid off. She was solving the wrong problem first. A 4% mortgage is not an emergency. A 22% credit card is. I don't blame her for it either. I made my own version of the same mistake, just at a different door. Treat every debt the same, and you'll either pay off cheap debt too aggressively while missing out on decades of compounding, or let expensive debt linger while you invest into an account quietly losing the race the whole time. It's also worth saying that this order isn't always as rigid in practice as it sounds laid out step by step. Someone with a manageable amount of credit card debt and a strong income might reasonably split extra money between paying it down and still claiming a match at the same time, rather than treating it as strictly one then the other. The priority underneath it doesn't change, but how narrowly or loosely you apply it can flex a little depending on how much breathing room your income actually gives you. Door 3 is the one this channel already walked through in detail: a fully funded emergency fund. If you've seen that video, you already know why it exists. It's not really about the money sitting there, it's about removing the kind of financial stress that leads to worse decisions everywhere else. If you haven't seen it, the short version is this: 3 to 6 months of essential expenses sitting somewhere separate and slightly inconvenient to reach before you move on to the next step. Skip this one, and eventually an emergency forces you to sell investments at exactly the wrong moment, undoing progress you spent years building. This is also usually the door where people get impatient because it doesn't feel like real investing. There's no chart to watch, no ticker to check, nothing that feels like progress in the way a growing brokerage balance does. I understand the pull to skip past it towards something that feels more exciting. But an emergency fund isn't the boring cousin of investing. It's the reason the investing that comes after it gets to stay untouched when life inevitably throws something unexpected at you. Door 4 is one most people have never even heard of, and it's easy to skip because most beginners don't actually qualify for it. The health savings account, available only to people enrolled in certain high-deductible health plans. If that's you, it's worth knowing about because it comes with something almost no other account offers: a triple tax advantage. Money goes in before tax, grows without being taxed, and comes out without being taxed either, as long as it's used for qualifying medical expenses. If you don't have access to one, don't worry about it. Just move straight to the next door. Door 5 is everything else that's tax advantaged: an individual retirement account, and the rest of your workplace plan beyond the match. The main lesson here is simple: fill these before a taxable account, because they shelter your investments from taxes in a way an ordinary brokerage account never can. Whether a traditional or Roth version suits you better depends on your income and your own tax situation, and that's genuinely worth a conversation with someone who can look at your specific numbers. But don't let that detail hold up the bigger point: tax advantaged first, regardless of which flavor you land on. There's a myth attached to this door too, that money in a retirement account is locked away and untouchable until you're old, which scares people into skipping it for something that feels more flexible. It's more nuanced than that. Contributions to a Roth account, for instance, can generally be withdrawn without penalty since you already paid tax on them going in, and there are specific, limited exceptions built into these accounts for certain early expenses. That doesn't mean treat a retirement account like a savings account. It's still meant to stay invested for decades, but the fear of total inaccessibility keeps people out of a door that's usually far more flexible than they assume, and that fear alone shouldn't be the reason a tax-advantaged door gets skipped. Only after all of that, the match, the high-interest debt, the emergency fund, the HSA, the tax-advantaged retirement accounts, does a regular taxable brokerage account enter the picture. Not because it's a bad account, because everything ahead of it in the order offers something a taxable account structurally can't: free money, guaranteed returns, protection from disaster, or a tax break. Once those are handled, a taxable account is simply where extra money goes to keep working. And if you don't have an employer plan at all, you're self-employed, or your job simply doesn't offer one, the order doesn't fall apart, it just starts one door later. High-interest debt becomes the first stop, then the emergency fund, then an HSA if you qualify, then an IRA you open yourself, then a taxable account. The names on the doors shift slightly depending on your situation. The certain before uncertain logic behind them doesn't. Let's actually run the numbers, because the order looks different depending on what you're working with. Imagine someone bringing home $4,000 a month, carrying a $3,000 credit card balance at 22%, no emergency fund yet, and an employer matching 4% of pay. The first move isn't invest less or cut every expense. It's finding whatever it takes to contribute up to that 4% match, even if it means paying only the minimum on the card for a month or two. Once that match is flowing in automatically, every paycheck, the next available dollar attacks the card, aggressively, until the balance hits zero. Only after the card is gone does the emergency fund become the priority, followed by whatever's left going toward the rest of the tax-advantaged accounts. Moving through all 6 doors in order can take a year, sometimes 2. That's normal. The order tells you where the next dollar goes. It was never a race to stand in every doorway on day one. If you watch the video on building an emergency fund, you already know the real trick isn't any of these 6 doors individually. It's automating all of them, so the sequence happens without you having to make 6 separate decisions every payday. Set the contribution percentage that hits the match. Set the extra payment toward the card. Set the transfer into the fund. Once automation is doing the sequencing, willpower stops being part of the equation, the same way it did for the fund itself. The goal was never remembering 6 decisions every payday. It was setting up one system that quietly makes them for you. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud, and it's the actual point of this whole video. The order isn't arbitrary. It runs from certain to uncertain. The employer match is certain. Paying off a 22% card is certain. An emergency fund removes a certain kind of risk. A tax break is certain, the moment you claim it. The stock market, by comparison, is not certain. It's a good bet over long stretches of time, with a long history of rewarding patience. But nobody can promise you what it does in any single year. Money should move from the most certain opportunities to the least certain ones, not the other way around. Chase the uncertain bet first, the way I did. And you're not being bold. You're just skipping the free money to go gamble on the maybe. Go back to those 2 people from the beginning, the one who invested first and the one who claimed the match first, in order. 10 years in, imagine both of them hit an unexpected job loss. The one who followed the order leans on the emergency fund built along the way, leaves the investments untouched, and starts again a few months later having lost nothing but time. The other one, without that buffer, sells investments in a bad month just to cover rent, locking in a loss at the worst possible moment. Same emergency, same market even, wildly different outcomes, and the difference was decided years earlier, before either of them had any idea an emergency was coming. 6 doors, in order: the match, the high-interest debt, the emergency fund, the HSA if you have one, the tax-advantaged accounts, then, finally, everything else. Somewhere around door 5, I finally went back and fixed what I'd missed at door 1. It took an afternoon. It should have taken an afternoon 2 years earlier. The goal was never to find the perfect investment. It was to stop giving away the free ones. Every dollar that skips a door it should have walked through first is a dollar working harder than it needs to, on a bet it didn't need to take. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about understanding money in a way that actually works in real life, not just on a whiteboard. That's exactly what this channel is all about. Every week, I break down personal finance, investing, budgeting, and wealth building into simple, practical lessons anyone can use. If that sounds like something you'd find valuable, consider subscribing. I'd love to have you here. Because the next time you sit down to invest a spare dollar, the question isn't where it should go first. It's whether you've already claimed everything that was free before you went looking for what wasn't.